Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours, with 10% off using code FD10. Follow the links in the description below.
Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, well, another episode of test driving my own cars again. It's a long-running and sporadic series, but here we are. Today, we're in the Mazda MX5, or technically this is a Eunos Roadster, because it's a Japanese import. But it's basically the same car, but with a few extra nice bits in it. However, this is a review I've been looking forward to doing for a very long time. I've been offered a number of MX5s by a number of viewers, and I've always been kind of putting it off a little bit, because I kind of knew I'd buy one eventually, because let's face it, they're brilliant. This is arguably the best sports car ever. It may not be as fast, as powerful, as luxurious as something like a Boxster or a Cayman, but there's just something very, very special about an MX5, which makes it just, well, one of the most involving and interesting cars you can possibly get out and drive. And if you like reviews of interesting and unusual cars, then please do hit like and subscribe. So, where to begin? Well, the beginning, I guess. By the 1980s, the sports car as a format was pretty much dead. The champions for decades have been the British, with things like the TR7, the various MGs going back to the 1930s, and of course the Lotus Elan in the 60s, that was a big one. But by the 1980s, well, the hot hatch had pretty much killed it in Europe. The Golf GTI, the Escort XR3i, had better performance, more practical, didn't leak, well, so much more to offer really, which is a kind of a shame. But front wheel drive, which is critical here. And in America, safety legislation, the big impact bumpers, the fear of a rollover legislation, meaning no more convertibles, was killing things off over there as well. And crash regulations meant that some of the old soft top designs just weren't going to cut it. They just weren't safe enough. So by the time this came out, the Roadster as a format, as I say, was basically gone. But Mazda hadn't just dreamed this up overnight. It had been coming for a long time. Way back in 1975, head of R&D Kimichi Yamamoto had been talking to Motor Trend journalist Bob Hall, and he'd asked him what did he think Mazda should be doing for their next idea, their next big project. And Bob Hall, who'd grown up with traditional British sports cars, MGs, Triumphs, that kind of thing, he said he wanted to rekindle that kind of idea, the wind in the hair, the bugs in the teeth kind of classic British sports car, but with modern reliability. You could turn the key and it would start every time. And Bob Hall was actually later employed by Mazda as their product planner for the US. And this sparked something with Yamamoto. He loved the idea. The trouble was, no one else was on board. This wasn't a mainstream car, this is very much a niche car. The trouble is, of course, manufacturers don't like niches, because there's not big money in a niche. And so although there was a determined team of engineers who were very, very keen to build this new lightweight sports car, there was no management backing for it. So it wasn't until nearly a decade later, when Yamamoto became president of Mazda Motor Company, that finally he was able to push this project through. Now they knew what they wanted in terms of concept. It had to be small, it had to be light, it had to be pretty, and it had to sound good and be a rewarding drive. Gin to a tie and all that. But they weren't really sure what to do. Front engine, front wheel drive was the way forward for everything in terms of cheap and easy manufacture by the 1980s. But it wasn't really what they wanted for a sports car. Mid-engine rear wheel drive was an option for exotic cars. Things like Lamborghinis and stuff. And also it meant they could take a front engine, front wheel drive package and stick it in the back and make an exotic car quite cheaply. But it could lead to some quite hairy handling. Look at the Mk1 MR2, for example. It did exactly that in the AW11 with a Corolla engine. And it's a brilliantly fun car to drive, but it can be hairy on the edge. And of course, the favoured design was front engine rear wheel drive, because that's where the traditional British sports car always had been. So it wasn't really a massive surprise when the Californian design with the front engine rear wheel drive Lightning McQueen lookalike won the day. I'll quickly tell you a little bit about this particular car that we're driving today. This is my own version. This is a 1990 Eunos Roadster. It was imported in the mid-1990s and converted to UK spec by Paul Sheard MX5. And it is a V Special, which is one of the early years special editions from 1990. So this car gets a limited slip diff in the back, it gets a strut brace in the front, air conditioning, leather seats. It's even still got the original V Special floor mats in it. And they all came in this interesting shade of neo green, or British racing green, as they were obviously harking back to and referencing. Along the way, someone has fitted these alloy wheels, which I'm not a big fan of, and they will be changed at some point soon. And I fitted coilovers, although even though they're meant to be lowering coilovers, they actually wound up being exactly the same height as the old springs that came off. So a little more work in the suspension and wheel department to be done on this car. Let's pull over and take a look around the outside of the thing. Yeah, pop-up headlights, oh, for the win. Right, so let's take a quick look around the MX5, Mazda, Miata, Eunos, whatever you want to call it, and have a quick look at the styling and the design of this thing, because it is perfect. It is the, well, it's the absolute embodiment of the sports car. They've crystallised every aspect of the greatest sports cars up until that point and put it into this one perfect gem of a sports car. So the design actually came from California. Mazda had 3 styling studios, 2 in Japan, 1 in California, and all 3 of them submitted designs for how the, well, wasn't even called anything at the time, the new lightweight sports car, LWS as it was called internally, might look like. They were looking at front engine, front wheel drive, mid engine, rear wheel drive, and front engine, rear wheel drive, which is of course where they wound up. And the embryonic version of this design, named Duo 101, came out of the California design studio, and looking at it, you really can see the California influences. There really is just something about it which just says California, especially California in the 80s, well, it's California now as well. It's just the smooth curves, the clean front, just the simple design. Look at Tesla now. They are also a California design studio, and you can sort of see elements of the simplicity in the MX5 that you can see in the modern Teslas. Although this looks a lot more cute and fun and interesting than the slightly bland Teslas we've got now. Now, the whole point of this project was to make a car that was small and light and nimble and involving as possible. You've probably heard the phrase Jinba Atai, which means, roughly translated, horse and rider as one, and it comes back from the old Japanese days of archery on horseback, and that was where they were going with this. They always knew from the very outset it was going to be tiny and small and light. The thing weighs 955 kilograms. It's got an aluminium bonnet, which helps with that weight. It's only 3.9 meters long, 1.6 meters wide. It's not quite K dimensions, but it really isn't that far off. And when in 1986 Toruhiko Hishai became the program manager, he was a young guy and he was aware of this new thing called CAD, computer-aided design. He was aware of the advantages this new system, this new clever technology could bring to his small and, well, budgetly constrained team, because they had very little resource to actually create this incredible car with. So he knew he could use the computers to design a chassis and a framework, an internal structure that was far, far stronger than all the traditional British sports cars it was basically replacing, and meet the new stringent safety requirements which were coming in from around the world, which those old cars really couldn't. A young, small, excited, motivated team, few resources, but a lot of know-how and a lot of can-do mentality, created this thing. And part of that strength came from the fact they added something called the PPF, or the power plant frame, which is like a strengthened X-frame, which goes from the back of the gearbox to the front of the differential and strengthens the chassis, takes out the power flex when you put your foot down. And the power for this car came from this, initially the 1.6 litre engine. Now, you might be thinking, oh, it's a sports car, it must have some cleverly developed, expensive, high-end, motor of some kind. No, because they were on a budget again, parts bin, stuff everywhere. This is the 4-banger from the 323, turned 90 degrees to fit into a rear-wheel drive car. However, that wasn't without issue, because they needed to make it, well, it couldn't just be like the cooking model anymore. There was a little issue with the distributor hitting the firewall, so they had to do a little bit of jiggery-pokery to make that fit, first of all. Secondly, they changed the crankshaft to a new lightweight model, so it spins up a bit more easily. There were some issues with the early ones. The short-nosed crank have issues with breakages. The later ones, which only came in after a couple of months, like this car, which is a 1990, the long-nosed crank resolved that. Underneath that, the sump has got special cooling fins, so the engine can run hotter, run faster, run harder, and cool the oil down. And at the top of the engine is a special dual overhead cam head, combined with an exhaust tuned especially to give the car a bit of a growl. It means this car revs smoothly and evenly all the way to 7,000 RPM, which your mum's cooking 323 won't do. So they took a basic off-the-shelf engine, transformed it into a sports car motor, again with limited budget, but with incredible results.
The power output from this thing is 115 horsepower and 135 newton meters of torque. That means it'll do 0 to 60 in 8.8 seconds. The ethos of the car was to make it very light and provide just enough power to have fun with, but it wasn't enough for some, so in 1994 they did replace, or add an option alongside, this 1597cc unit to a 1.8 version, which made 131 horsepower, so another 16 bhp for another 200 cc's, give or take. So the interior of this thing is small and simple, but it was always going to be. That was kind of the intention with this thing. Keep it simple, keep it light, keep it focused on the drive and not a lot else. So on the doors, we have got a very basic door card, black padded area at the top, coloured vinyl at the bottom, a single speaker in the front of the door, and we've got a combined door handle and lock up here in the back. This car actually has central locking as well, which I'm not sure is standard or not. We also have a very tiny armrest and door pull. No door pockets, no cup holders, and this shuts fairly tight against the seat as well, so there's not really a lot of room around it. In terms of the all-important T-shelfery, it's not great. It's a big flat area, but it is sloping, so you really do need to be using tactile foods if you want to snack on the dashboard. Something like gummy bears that can be gummed onto there and just peeled off as you want to eat them. Maybe red rope licorice might be quite good for this particular car. You sort of suck it in as you're eating it. That might be quite good as well, actually. In front of the driver, in this little domed binnacle, we've got 5 dials. We've got a rev counter going all the way to, well, 8,000 RPM redlining at 7,250, which is epic for a little 4-banger. We've also got speedometer going up to 120 miles an hour. It'll hit about 115 or so, I think. And we've got a fuel gauge, a temperature gauge, and an oil pressure gauge as well, which is a really uncommon thing on a car this modern. This car, because it was a Japanese import version, it's actually all in kilometers an hour, and we've got these white dial covers placed over the top of them, so we've got MPH over there, so we know how fast we're actually driving, which is thankfully something of relief. It's a bit scary when you look at the odometer and it says 215,000, but that's kilometers, not miles, so it's actually nowhere near that far. Still quite a lot though. Moving back towards the driver, we've got our wipers on the left-hand side, and of course we've got our indicators on the right, because Japanese and our pop-up headlights and side lights are operated on that as well. And coming closer still, in this car, because it's a V Special, we've got this beautiful Nardi wood rim steering wheel. This also has a Nardi wood handbrake handle as well, and unfortunately someone has taken and thrown away in favour of this rather not great, unscrew off quite easily-able metal gear knob. It came with a Nardi wood gear knob when it was new. Horrifically expensive to replace these days, sadly. Now, there were dozens and dozens of trim levels, so what you actually get in all of them does vary to a small extent, but to a large extent they're all basically the same. In the centre, we've got a very, very simple layout. We've got a pair of eyeball vents, and there's 2 more eyeball vents on either end of the dashboard. Hazard lights in the centre, and a button to raise and lower the lights without turning them on just below that. That's a lovely little display there. We'll make a nice t-shirt actually. Underneath that we've got a heating and ventilation controller. Nothing exciting there. Although this one though, again being a V Special, comes with air conditioning, so you can air condition the entire world if you really want to. Naturally it doesn't work on this car. Below that, singled-in radio, not the original, and a singled-in blanking plate. Now there are loads of options you can do with this. You can change it to a doubled-in radio, you can put a singled-in at the top, and you can put various cubbyhole options underneath there. So many things. Because the MX5 is so popular, there are loads of options. Now this wood pattern is not original. Someone has stuck this on at some point in the past. I'm tempted to take it off, but I know it would leave a bit of horrible residue and I'd have to stick something else on instead, and I don't know what, so I'll leave it for now. Kind of goes with the Nardi wood rim as well. Now, more V Specialness, we've got a beige leather gear gaiter as well, which matches the beige leather seats, which is another V Special option. Now that gaiter does of course go around the magnificent manual 5-speed gearbox, which is fabulous, and a little ashtray in the middle as well. I've seen accessories where you can put a mobile phone holder in there, which is a great idea, except you can't actually change gear when you fitted it. Electric windows in this car. Manual windows were in a lot of cars, so it's a little bit unusual to have electric windows, but again, V Special. And behind that, we've got a lockable cubby storage hole, which opens up to give you a little bit of storage and access to your fuel cap release thing. Of course, as I say, is lockable for security. And the courtesy lights are down here by your knees, so they are great for seeing where you've put your feet. It's very clever packaging. It's not a lot of space in this car, but they fitted everything around you very well. One of the cleverest things is these sun visors. Because they have to take such little amount of space, they're hinged and then folded, so you can fold them into a tiny, weeny space. They're absolutely brilliant. There's a load of Japanese writing on there, which I did take the time to translate. Doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but roughly it says something along the lines of, please fasten your seatbelt. Don't let it get too hot. Please be especially careful around children. There is a risk. Do not wear a convertible top on a monthly, please. I'm not sure Google's 100% right on this. And the other absolutely brilliant thing about the interior of this car, because obviously you're in a convertible and the wind noise gets pretty loud when you're out and about, there's no wind buffers behind you unless you had one like aftermarket. We've got speakers, stereo speakers, in each of the headrests, so you can hear the music coming straight to your head when you're driving along. Absolutely fabulous idea, brilliant. Now, looking in the boot, and you can tell this is a JDM import version car because we've got high-level brake lights and we've got the square number plate, which shows it as a Japanese car originally. Also, we've got the hemorrhoid fog lamp down here in the bottom. When I did my Crown Victoria, rather than do the hemorrhoid, I actually changed one of the reversing lights for a fog light, which I think looks a little bit neater. Anyway, the boot is not huge, but it's not a very big car. It's big enough to fit a few bits and bobs in. You do have a space-saver spare wheel. I'm not sure I would trust this now 34-year-old tyre if I had to drive anywhere. It says 60 psi in it. I'll back away from it gently. But yes, this is the boot. You can only access it with the key for security reasons. For that reason, be very careful when you shut it. You've got the key in your pocket still.
So back on the road, and we get to really experience what the MX5 is all about, and it is the drive. It's near 50-50 weight distribution, which is fantastic. It weighs nothing. It's 950 or so kilos low, so it's super lightweight. They went for independent suspension all round, double wishbone independent suspension all round. They were going for trying to use as many parts bin items as possible, just to keep the cost down. They made a mule using off-the-shelf bits, but nothing really worked. It was just not satisfying enough for what they wanted. So they binned that. They looked at RX-7 suspension, too big and bulky. So they had to go bespoke, double wishbones all round, and it works fabulously. Not every car got power steering or ABS, and honestly, it's all the better without it. It's more pure. The steering is so sensitive and so direct that you can really feel every little thing. You're just totally aware. It's mechanical, it's analog, and it's direct to the brain. Takeo Kojima, the head of chassis design, he said that he wanted to make the car, or a car, which felt like an extension of your hands and feet, so you become part of it. And honestly, he really did. Although later on, an automatic was an option on this car, I think largely for the American market, the manual gearbox is one of the things that makes the car. But incredibly, this is another parts bin item. It's actually from the RX-7, and now I stand to be corrected on this. But I have a feeling that was already a parts bin item from a van. So Mazda do engineer some pretty good stuff. So you do find the MX-5 gearbox being reused in aftermarket gearbox conversions quite a lot because it's very small and very strong. This is a car which does nothing but put a smile on your face. It's not the most sensible or practical because it's only a two-seater, the boot's not very big. It's an 80s convertible, so the roof leaks. But every time you drive it, you just grin. It's just non-stop smiles and fun all the way. Now they were still, even in the late 80s, unsure whether this was going to be a hit or not. So, because it was aimed quite heavily at the American market, they built a plastic mock-up of what the shell was going to look like and showed it to a panel of US consumers who all loved it and said, yes, please build it. Then they took 12 prototypes to America, showed them to US journalists who drove it, and they all said, yes, please build it. So finally it was revealed at the Chicago Auto Show in 1989, and everyone said, thank you for building it. It is just so much fun hooning this thing around. I was going to say you don't need to go fast in this thing, but when you want to go fast, you actually can go pretty rapidly because the balance on it is just so perfect. It just feels like it's like they intended. It's an extension of you. You think about where you want the car to go, and it goes there, which is fantastic. There's not many cars can do that. The original Renault Alpine is that kind of thing, and the original Lotus Elan, of course. And the new Esprit is pretty similar as well. And people said, thank you for building it. And they bought them in their droves. Between 1989, when it came out, and 1996, when the NB was released, they sold 26,000 of them, which is actually may not sound like a huge number, but for a niche sports car, that's actually enormous numbers. And of course the NB, the Mark II, did brilliantly as well. And then so did the NC and the latest Mark IV. And the thing is, the difference between this and the classic British sports cars of days of yore is that, well, with things like the MGB, oh, why is someone taking this fabulous corner at 12 miles an hour? Is that BL, well, they basically let the MG stagnate, and they built the same car for 28 years or something crazy, with only minor changes. Mazda have updated it massively through the years, so the current version bears no relation to this version whatsoever. The NB, of course, is virtually the same car, but with a lot of tweaks. The NC was an all-new car, and the ND, was it ND? The Mark IV, all new as well. Now, you might have noticed this car has got 3 names, MX5, Miata, and Eunos Roadster. And that's because Mazda, well, badged it differently in different places. They wanted to call it the Miata in Japan as well, apparently, but it sounds very close to Miata Bicycle Company, and they're worried about lawsuits. MX5 was apparently a internal development name, so that's what the global name was. But in Japan, Eunos was a high-end product line that Mazda had, a bit like the Ford Vignale, so they became the Eunos Roadster in Japan. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this run out in this epic little sports car. It's tiny, it's lightweight, and it is brilliant. And honestly, I love this thing. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please hit like and subscribe. And join us again next time driving something completely different.